Good day, folks. This is Scott. It's Monday, the 2nd of October. I'd like to give you some feedback on the Comparing Evaluation Approaches assignment that was due this weekend. I appreciate the full engagement that you did. Some of you were quite detailed in your responses, and I really appreciate the recognition that there's a lot of difference in these approaches, and depending on which one we choose, it affects the role of the stakeholder, the types of questions that would be asked, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd like to highlight a few of the points that I learned from reading your postings, and hopefully this will just serve as kind of a general review. I'll give individual feedback when we get to the end of the session at the end of next week. So I think I have 6 or 7 points here I'd like to outline quickly. First one is, it's really important to first determine the purpose for the evaluation and who's calling for the evaluation prior to selecting an approach, because it depends on the purpose of the evaluation as to what type of approach you'll use. So this has to be considered from the beginning: who's calling the evaluation, what the purpose is. Is it a formative type evaluation where you're looking for program improvement, or is it a more of a summative evaluation where you're actually looking to either discontinue the program or refund it? Secondly, the role of the evaluator does change based on the approach and the purpose. So often an internal evaluator is used for a number of programs, and that's quite appropriate in many cases. On the other hand, sometimes an external evaluator is used, and this is often the case in federally funded or foundation-funded programs. One of the things to be aware of is that what the relationship is between the evaluator and the program operators. And indeed, if I gave any advice on this I'd be very cautious that a program operator is not used as the evaluator of the program. Thirdly, just remember this, that once you select an approach, which comes after you've determined what the purpose of the evaluation is, a particular emphasis is established for that evaluation. And therefore, once that emphasis is established, that certain data and certain voices will be attended to more than others. And that's by design. Now, this will then lead to asking a question: what about the voices and data that aren't directly related to this emphasis? Well, that can be a problem. And you just need to keep in mind that all evaluation is somewhat of a political act. And I'll deal with that a little more at a future point. But bias is to be of concern. It's always a concern. Ask yourself these questions: who's involved? What is their stake in the program? What type of power do they yield over the program participants, the program operators? What do particular stakeholders have to gain depending on what kind of a result there is to an evaluation? How are we guarding against specifically, or at least acknowledging that there is bias in an evaluation? Several of you pointed out that some of these approaches seem to be polar opposites, and indeed it's true that different approaches to evaluation have different purposes, and therefore they do at times seem to be somewhat opposite. If you looked at it holistically, what evaluation would really do is to consider the needs of that require a program to be in place, what the processes of the program are, what type of inputs are going into the program, and the program outcomes. Those would all be considered when you're doing an evaluation. But because of politics and cost and time constraints and basic assumptions of the various stakeholders, there's limits put on evaluations. We often can't look at the needs, the processes, the inputs, and the outcomes all together. So there's a limit to the full potential of what we can actually learn about this program in order to make a judgment about it. Now, politics is always an important consideration. Politics is a political act. Whenever you're making a judgment about whether something is valuable or worthwhile or not, people stand to win and people stand to lose. So remember my shorthand definition of politics. It's the competition for ends and the means to achieve them. So whenever there's competition, there's winners and losers. And at times in programs, educational programs, federally funded, state-funded, foundation-funded programs, there's a real large investment of time, energy, and other resources that are put into these. And if it turns out that a particular judgment is made about a program, funding may cease, or funding may continue for a program that is really rather ineffective. So you can see that bias in politics often enter into evaluation decision-making, and we just need to be on guard for that and acknowledge that it can happen, and it does happen. Finally, evaluation itself can serve as a really good medium for communication. So no matter what the outcomes of an evaluation are, the simple act of going through a program evaluation can raise a level of knowledge and increase the communication between stakeholders and among stakeholders of a program. So there's other points I could make. These are just a few. Again, I appreciate the work you've done, and I look forward to your fuller report on the particular approach you were assigned at the end of this weekend. I wish you a good week. Keep up the good work, and I trust that all is going well for you and yours. Thank you. Good day.